The attack on Dargo was unsettling, broken only by the crackle of burnt timber and the distant murmur of stunned residents. What had been a bustling military base, a checkpoint symbolizing state control in a region often threatened by militants, now lay in ruins. According to local leaders, around 100 heavily armed attackers stormed the facility in the early hours, overwhelming defenses in a matter of minutes. The strike was swift, precise, and brutal. Witnesses reported an initial burst of gunfire, followed by a wave of fighters entering the compound. Some threw incendiaries while others focused on disabling vehicles and communications equipment. By the time the shooting stopped, much of the base had been looted, vehicles torched, and critical supplies destroyed. 50 Burkinabé soldiers lay dead, making it one of the bloodiest single attacks in recent memory. For the attackers, this was more than an assault. It was a message. Dargo sits in a strategically vital corridor, connecting northern Burkina Faso to cross-border routes that have long been exploited by armed groups for moving weapons, goods, and fighters. Striking here was symbolic, a direct challenge to the government's tightening grip on territory and its crackdown on the economic lifelines of militant operations. The timing was telling. Just months earlier, President Ibrahim Traoré's government had introduced measures to fortify remote bases, integrate civilian volunteer forces, and cut off illicit financing tied to unregulated gold exports. The Dargo base was part of this new security structure, tasked with intercepting armed groups and monitoring the supply chains insurgents depend on to survive. Analysts believe this was no spontaneous raid. The attackers knew when to strike, where to hit, and what to destroy, suggesting insider knowledge or even external support. Local reaction has been one of shock but also defiance. Instead of fleeing, as often happens after such attacks, many residents stayed. They helped recover bodies, assist the wounded, and guard what remained of the facility. Community leaders called for unity, urging citizens not to let fear undo the progress toward self-reliance and stability. Social media flooded with tributes to the fallen soldiers, describing them not as victims but as heroes who stood their ground to protect the nation's sovereignty. International headlines, however, rushed to frame the attack as proof of growing instability, echoing familiar narratives about Burkina Faso's supposed inability to govern without foreign intervention. On the ground, many saw it differently. To them, this was not weakness, but desperation from those losing influence as the government asserted greater control over its land and resources. A deeper question looms. Why does this pattern keep repeating? Every time Burkina Faso takes bold steps toward independence, a wave of violent pushback follows. Are these merely militant operations, or are broader forces, economic, political, and even foreign, working behind the scenes to keep the country unstable? The Dargo attack was brutal, but its timing sets it apart. It was not random chaos, it was retaliation. When Burkina Faso changes the rules of the game, those who thrived under the old rules don't sit quietly, they strike back. For decades, Burkina Faso's security model followed a predictable script. Foreign troops led the fight, international aid programs dictated the terms, and large foreign companies extracted resources while promising development. Insurgency existed in that system, but it was managed chaos. Chaos that justified foreign military bases, arms deals, and endless peacekeeping missions. President Ibrahim Traoré has been dismantling that dependency. He ended long-standing foreign military arrangements that operated with minimal transparency. He created local defense forces, empowering communities to take charge of their security, and introduced policies to control and process Burkina Faso's natural resources at home instead of exporting them raw. Violence often increases when a country steps away from dependency. History offers parallels. Ghana under Kwame Nkrumah faced political sabotage when it pursued economic independence in the 1960s. Burkina Faso's own Thomas Sankara faced fierce resistance when he sought food self-sufficiency and nationalized resources, resistance that ultimately cost him his life. Today, by blocking illicit gold exports and securing border points like Dargo, Burkina Faso is choking off the lifeblood of armed networks and the shadowy profiteers behind them. The Dargo base wasn't just a military outpost. It was a barrier to the free movement of weapons, cash, and fighters. That's why it was targeted. Insurgent groups rarely operate in isolation. Funding, intelligence leaks, and careful planning often point to larger forces at play. Someone benefits from making sure Burkina Faso never fully controls its territory. Yet the public response has been striking. Instead of calling for a return to foreign-led security, citizens are rallying around Traoré's sovereignty-first path. Many now see the spike in violence as proof of progress, not failure. This creates a paradox. The more the country asserts independence, the more violent the pushback. But rather than deter change, this resistance exposes how deeply foreign influence and illicit networks were entrenched. Attacks like Dargo are not signs of collapse, they are signs of transformation under pressure. Traoré's vision goes beyond defeating insurgents. It is about permanently breaking free from systems designed to keep Burkina Faso weak. For decades, gold and other resources flowed out of the country with little benefit to citizens. Foreign companies took raw materials, processed them abroad, and reaped massive profits. This structure didn't just drain wealth, it bred corruption, inequality, and instability. By building domestic refining facilities and banning raw gold exports, the government is keeping more wealth at home. That alone disrupts powerful interests, both local and foreign. Unregulated trade has long funded insurgent groups, who tax or directly control smuggling routes. Securing points like Dargo cuts off that revenue, and those who profited from it are lashing out. Traoré's reforms extend to security. Instead of relying on foreign military missions, Burkina Faso is investing in community defense forces like the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDP. These civilian units, working alongside the army, are reclaiming rural areas once abandoned to militants. Diplomatically, the country is pivoting toward partners who work without imposing political conditions, aligning with neighbors like Mali and Niger in a shared sovereignty-driven agenda. This is why Dargo happened now and why it was so fierce. It was not just an attack on soldiers, it was an attack on a vision. And in the wake of tragedy, that vision has only grown stronger. Across Burkina Faso, the fallen soldiers are being remembered as defenders of the nation's new direction. Vigils, murals, songs, and school lessons are transforming grief into unity. Social media is amplifying this sentiment with messages like, "They died so Burkina Faso can live free," and "Our heroes, our sovereignty." This narrative is bridging divides of politics, ethnicity, and geography, turning fear into ownership of the sovereignty struggle. The government has pledged long-term support for the families of the fallen, scholarships for children, jobs for spouses, and national honors. Survivors from Dargo have spoken publicly about their comrades' courage, inspiring new enlistments rather than deterring them. Traditional leaders have performed warrior-honoring ceremonies, tying today's defenders to centuries of resistance. Artists and musicians are immortalizing the moment, embedding the Dargo sacrifice into the national consciousness. The mood has shifted from passive mourning to active participation. Independence will not be handed to Burkina Faso, it must be fought for and paid for, sometimes at the highest cost. In response, the government is accelerating rural security upgrades, expanding surveillance technology, deploying rapid response teams, and integrating intelligence networks to prevent future surprise attacks. The economic front is advancing too, refining gold locally, building food self-sufficiency, and cutting dependency on foreign aid. The lesson from Dargo is clear. Without control over resources and livelihoods, foreign interference thrives. By reclaiming both, Burkina Faso is making such attacks strategically less valuable. The Sahel is watching. Mali, Niger, and others are aligning with Burkina Faso's approach, not just in military cooperation, but in economic initiatives like shared refining and agriculture. This threatens entrenched power structures far beyond Africa. For decades, instability in the Sahel justified foreign military presence, aid programs with strings attached, and resource contracts favoring outsiders. If Burkina Faso succeeds despite attacks like Dargo, it could inspire a continental wave of sovereignty movements. That's why those benefiting from the old system, both militants and their backers, are desperate to create fear and doubt. But unity is proving to be a powerful weapon. The nation has crossed a psychological threshold. It is no longer asking for permission to exist on its terms, it is asserting that right regardless of the cost. For the families of the Dargo soldiers, that cost is personal. For the nation, it is a reminder. Independence is never given. It is taken and defended. In honoring their sacrifice, Burkina Faso is not just remembering the past, it is charting a future where no external power decides its fate. If that vision holds, the ripple effects could transform the Sahel from a symbol of instability into one of resilience and self-determination. The road ahead will be hard, but the direction is clear. Forward together and on their own terms.